Time now for another episode of How Is This a Thing? And we begin with this article from CNBC. Dr. Anthony Fauci says there's a chance coronavirus vaccine may not provide immunity for very long. White House health advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci said he worries about the durability of a potential coronavirus vaccine, saying there's a chance it may not provide long-term immunity. If the COVID-19 acts like other coronaviruses, it likely isn't going to be a long duration of immunity, Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, said during an interview Tuesday evening with JAMA editor Howard Bauschner. When you look at the history of coronaviruses, the common coronaviruses that cause the common cold, the reports in the literature are that the durability of immunity, that's protective, ranges from 3 to 6 months to almost always less than a year, he said. That's not a lot of durability and protection. Yeah, everybody knows that you can't cure the common cold, and coronaviruses mutate, and attempting to successfully produce a working coronavirus vaccine, especially given the accelerated timetable, would be an exercise in futility. And I think the public have been under such a spell for the last few months that it's as if they've forgotten basic medical knowledge that they used to take for granted. That once you have a virus, you're immune for life. For example, once you've recovered from the flu, you never get that same flu again. You could get a different flu, but not the same flu. To avoid or greatly reduce your chances of getting colds and flus, it's important to look after one's health and take various steps to improve and strengthen one's immune system. And there's a lot of natural ways in which we can do this. Now, there is another possible reason as to why Fauci is saying what he's saying in this article. And my first reaction was, is it because we'll basically be getting multiple regular coronavirus vaccines and booster shots on an ongoing basis? That would certainly be consistent with the theory that this crisis has at least been in part a massive marketing campaign for Big Pharma and pushing a new business model of annual vaccines for everybody. The second component is, of course, about control, that the populace won't be able to live anywhere near as freely as they once did without conforming to this new medical tyranny. Fauci said Tuesday that the biotech company expects to enroll about 30,000 individuals when it begins a phase 3 trial in July. He said there are at least 4 trials for potential vaccines that he is either directly or indirectly involved in. Fauci said that by the beginning of 2021, we hope to have hundreds of millions of doses. When asked whether scientists will be able to find an effective vaccine, Fauci said he's cautiously optimistic, adding that there's never a guarantee. He cautioned it could take months and months and months to get an answer before scientists discover whether the vaccine works. U.S. officials and scientists are hopeful a vaccine to prevent COVID-19 will be ready in the first half of 2021, 12 to 18 months since Chinese scientists first identified the coronavirus and mapped its genetic sequence. It's a record-breaking time frame for a process that normally takes about a decade for an effective and safe vaccine. The fastest ever vaccine development, mumps, took more than 4 years and was licensed in 1967. Yeah, there's absolutely zero chance of me taking that shot in the arm. It's basically like subjecting the entire population of the planet to a global clinical trial. So, moving on, this article takes us neatly to the next one from News Punch. Bill Gates, the world may need 14 billion doses of a coronavirus vaccine to stop the virus. The world could need as many as 14 billion doses of coronavirus vaccines to help make people immune to the disease, according to Bill Gates. Business Insider reports in a blog post Thursday, the billionaire Microsoft co-founder and philanthropist outlined what the race for a vaccine could look like, including how long it will take to develop one that's both safe and effective, how it will be produced, and who should get it first. We need to manufacture and distribute at least 7 billion doses of the vaccine, Gates said, adding that number could be 14 billion if it's a multi-dose vaccine. He said the vaccines should be distributed as soon as the first batch is ready to go. So there you have it, from the horse's mouth. Confirmation of what we've been suspecting for months, that humanity is expected to get multiple vaccines to fight this virus that only a tiny percentage of people are at risk from, and it's the fastest mass-produced vaccine ever, meaning that there's no way it could possibly have gone through the necessary safety requirements that a vaccine normally has to go through. So obviously the risk of side effects increases. But Bill Gates seems okay with that so long as vaccine companies have indemnity.
We clearly need a vaccine that works in the upper age range because they're most at risk of that. And doing that so that you amp it up so it works in older people and yet you don't have side effects. If we have, 1 in 10,000 side effects, that's, way more, 700,000, people who will suffer from that. So really understanding the safety at gigantic scale across all age ranges, pregnant, male, female, undernourished, existing comorbidities, it's very, very hard. And that actual decision of, okay, let's go and give this vaccine to the entire world, governments will have to be involved because there will be some risk and indemnification needed before that can be decided on. People like myself and Tony Fauci are saying 18 months. If everything went perfectly, we could do slightly better than that. But there will be a trade-off. We'll have less safety testing than we typically would have. And so governments will have to decide, do they indemnify the companies and really say, let's go out with this when we just don't have the time to do what we normally do.
Next up, this article is from RT. Professor Lockdown Ferguson, UK's COVID-19 SAR, admits crippling restrictions made no difference. Where's the outrage? The British scientist known as Professor Lockdown has undermined the draconian policy he unleashed on the world by confessing that Britain hasn't fared any better in tackling the disease than the laid-back Scandus. Professor Neil Ferguson probably woke up this morning breathing a massive sigh of relief because he hadn't been ripped to shreds again in the British papers for this second time in under just a month, this time over his startling admission that there has been no significant difference in the levels of COVID-19 suppression when comparing to the UK and Sweden. During his evidence to the House of Lords Science and Technology Committee on Tuesday, he said, they, Swedish scientists, came to a different policy conclusion based really on quite similar science. I don't agree with it, but scientifically, they're not far from scientists in any part of the world. He then acknowledged that the Swedish authorities had got a long way to the same effect without a full lockdown. In other words, in a type of roundabout waffling way you'd expect from a bumbling boffin, the scientist, dubbed Professor Lockdown, after he cajoled Boris Johnson into bringing the British economy to a screeching halt, reckons Sweden has essentially coped very well without being forced into a draconian lockdown. Thank you very much. As I've mentioned before, the data modelling developed by Ferguson at Imperial College London for the lockdown has also been exposed as extremely poor and flawed, and as soon as this information came to light, the lockdown should have been lifted globally. Anyway, as you know, the same officials who've been telling us for weeks to stay indoors in order to protect the elderly, vulnerable, and doctors and nurses seem to now be okay with the current BLM protests. This article is from Fox News. Officials who pushed strict lockdowns now argue protesters are an exception. You must stay home to save lives. You must socially distance and lock down, unless you're protesting racism and police brutality. This appears to be the message from some government and health officials who for months enforced a rigorous and unprecedented economic shutdown in the name of stemming the spread of the coronavirus pandemic, resulting in millions losing their jobs and students being sent home from schools across the country. But as states just now begin to emerge from those lockdowns, some have argued in favour of an exception to those guidelines for those protesting the death of George Floyd, suggesting the gains from seeking police reforms outweigh the risks of a new surge in virus cases. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, whose state had some of the harshest lockdown measures in the country, was pictured shoulder to shoulder protesting with other officials and demonstrators. Her office told the Detroit News that Whitmer wore a mask and denied she violated her executive order. It really just feels like we're getting played here, doesn't it? Anybody who still thinks that this is a Spanish flu-like virus worth crashing the economy for and introducing widespread social changes and mandatory vaccines is not someone who can see sense or reason. But the outlet noted a page of frequently asked questions about the order on the governor's website specifically says persons may engage in expressive activities protected by the First Amendment within the state of Michigan, but must adhere to social distancing measures recommended by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, including remaining at least 6 feet from people from outside the person's household. The report also noted that a month ago, she was warning that anti-lockdown protesters who showed up at the Capitol risk forcing the stay-at-home order to continue for longer. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, meanwhile, suggested that protesters against police brutality were more important than business owners keen to know when they could regain their livelihoods. I don't want to make light of this, and I'll probably get lit up by everybody who owns a nail salon in the state, Murphy said during a Monday briefing. But it's one thing to protest what day nail salons are opening, and it's another to come out in peaceful protest overwhelmingly about somebody who was murdered right before our eyes. Can we start a new hashtag? Something like all livelihoods matter or something. Can that be a hashtag? Because it's clear that the economic devastation and widespread poverty and Great Depression that may very well come from this in the coming months and years was due to short-sighted narcissistic virtue signaling. The decision to go out or not go out, as long as you do it responsibly, safely, and peacefully, that's a decision I would say, in this particular instance, I would leave to the individuals, he said. Odd. Why couldn't that have been the thinking during the COVID crisis? So, during the corona crisis, why weren't people allowed to individually assess the risk of going outside or opening their businesses? Seems to me like the BLM racial tension narrative was much more important than what they wanted people to believe was a serious health issue. Almost like they know on some level that this isn't a serious health issue, or at least it isn't to the vast majority of the populace. However, most of New Jersey's edicts have not been left to the individuals, and businesses and other activities have been locked down by state mandate. In Washington, D.C., Mayor Muriel Bowser on Friday visited a Black Lives Matter mural and posed with supporters and officials while briefly removing her mask to pose for pictures. Meanwhile, Politico gathered examples of a number of experts who have reversed course on the importance of keeping strict social distancing measures in place. We should always evaluate the risks and benefits of efforts to control the virus, Jennifer Nuzzo, a Johns Hopkins epidemiologist, tweeted on Tuesday. In this moment, the public health risks of not protesting to demand an end to systemic racism greatly exceed the harms of the virus. I should point out that people have been using the Johns Hopkins website to track the number of COVID-19 cases and deaths for several months now. The outlet also noted that former Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director Tom Frieden, who strongly warned against efforts to rush reopening, is now supportive of mass protests. Sounds like it's okay to break all the lockdown and social distancing rules so long as you're protesting something that the left is on board with. Meanwhile, The Atlantic reported on a letter signed by 100 people in the public health community, first drafted by infectious disease experts at the University of Washington, which reaches the conclusion that the protests are okay. It says, "To the extent possible, we support the application of these public health best practices during demonstrations that call attention to the pervasive lethal force of white supremacy. However, as public health advocates, we do not condemn these gatherings as risky for COVID-19 transmission. We support them as vital to the national public health and to the threatened health specifically of black people in the United States," the letter says. Some experts have pointed out that the virus does not spread easily outdoors. However, this sudden openness to outdoor mass events may surprise those who were scolded for going to the beach in Florida or who live in New York City where playgrounds are still closed. It's truly insulting to one's intelligence, isn't it? How can they expect the populace to take all of the social distancing and virus panic seriously when suddenly it can all be temporarily put on hold for a new narrative? Final story of the day is from True Pundit. German official leaks report denouncing COVID-19 as a global false alarm. Germany's federal government and mainstream media are engaged in damage control after a report that challenges the established corona narrative leaked from the Interior Ministry. Some of the report key passages are: the dangerousness of COVID-19 was overestimated. Probably at no point did the danger posed by the new virus go beyond the normal level. The people who die from corona are essentially those who would statistically die this year because they have reached the end of their lives and their weakened bodies can no longer cope with any random everyday stress, including the approximately 150 viruses currently in circulation. Worldwide, within a quarter of a year, there has been no more than 250,000 deaths from COVID-19, compared to 1.5 million deaths, 25,100 in Germany, during the influenza wave 2017 to 2018. The danger is obviously no greater than that of any other viruses. There is no evidence that this was more than a false alarm. Our approach could go along the lines: during the corona crisis, the state has provided itself as one of the biggest producers of fake news. Yeah, pretty much what I've been saying for weeks now. Anyway, guys, thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.